booked in just for the afternoon. You missed an excellent morning session, a slightly overwhelming amount of content and discussion, but it set us up wonderfully for the further discussions this afternoon. We're actually switching now from policy and principles behind LTPs to the real world of getting them prepared at the local level. And we've rounded up an excellent set of practitioners from different types of transport authority to provide their thoughts on what it's like to be at the sharp end at the moment of preparing LTPs and how they see that going forward. I'm delighted that I'm getting a break from chairing this session where Nick Ruxton-Boyle, who's the Director of Environment at Project Centre, will ably take the chair and introduce the speakers and coordinate the discussion following. So I'm very pleased to hand over to you, Nick, now.
Thanks, Peter, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name's Nick and I'm a transport planner by trade, so I have prepared a number of LTPs in my time and really looking forward to this session. We've got 4 presentations, hopefully, from colleagues who are at the coalface of LTP preparation. That's quite an old-fashioned term, isn't it? Maybe we should say lithium face these days. But anyway, they are actually delivering these on the ground in their authorities. So really looking forward to what they have to say about the key challenges that we have in 2022. So I'm going to start with a double act. We've got David and Alex from Transport for the West Midlands. David and Alex, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to kick off and just give a bit of sort of an overview of how we're starting to approach the LTP in the West Midlands. So a bit of context, I'm sure everyone kind of knows we're all right in the middle. So we're the second or the largest metropolitan area in the UK with around 3 million people. And a very diverse area with local authorities, big urban areas like Birmingham, but also very rural areas such as Solihull, and very polycentric areas of the Black Country, which make kind of LTP and the kind of transport strategy that we need across the region quite diverse. And what we decided to do, and one of the big challenges I think we had when we started to look at this LTP, was that the guidance that existed was already, it's called, woefully out of date. And we needed to kind of think about what sort of problems were we trying to solve, and look at things differently. And we sort of published an LTP in 2016 called Movement for Growth, but that was far more developed as a prospectus to kind of set out the kind of the big ticket infrastructure that we thought we needed to deliver to support the growth, and some of the other things that perhaps now that we're focusing on far more were dumbed down in the mix. Whilst they were referred to, they weren't kind of front and center stage. So we've kind of starting to flip the way we're thinking about LTPs. So in 2021, we published a green paper to start a conversation with both the public but also politicians around the challenges. We've got big problems to solve like everyone else, and what we wanted to do with that green paper was really to sort of take stock and look at the where we'd got to, and really were we really having the impacts on the outcomes that we'd been talking about over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And whilst carbon was sort of central to that, as this conversation today is picking up on, we also knew there were other things. So, for example, this Combined Authorities Inclusive Growth Agenda was really at the heart of it as well. And what we wanted to try and also get across is this really is more than just a switch to electric vehicles. We really need to have that conversation about how do we start to reduce travel overall, and in particular car use, and get the public thinking about how we start to move forward on that conversation. And I think we're sort of taking stock. We're kind of looking at what's going on. And we know that hypermobility and that hyperconnectivity that particularly motorized private vehicles have had on our lifestyles and the way we live our lives over the last 50, 60, 70 years have really changed then our sort of aspirations and behaviours about what we expect from the transport system. And we also know that transport remains the biggest sector of carbon emissions, and this hasn't been reducing. And the truth is, our current approach to transport strategy and transport planning, not just in the West Midlands, but broadly across the UK, won't cut it. We have to look at the problem differently. So, for example, a lot of movement for growth was very much focused on those key movements to our strategic centres. But we know that only 15% of all trips in the aim pick pre-pandemic were going in and out of those strategic centres, and that 85% of all other trips were happening across the conurbation. And we're not really touching those. And if we're going to get to the heart of both decarbonisation, but also those wider changes we need to really get the impacts around inclusive growth, then we need a much more holistic and wider range of transport interventions than we're currently delivering. And it's important that we think differently about those interventions. We need to think about how we reimagine, and that's what our LTP core strategy is called. It's called Reimagining and Transport in the West Midlands, because there are better ways that we can create accessibility and connect people to the opportunities and allow them to live their lives. So it goes without saying that, you know, internal combustion engines are very inefficient, whilst they've got better in recent years. We've also seen a shift towards bigger, heavier vehicles, which have actually sort of offset some of those benefits, and at the same time have even more unsustainable in terms of the space they require and amount of road space and so on. So there are some big challenges, and what we're trying to do through this is really flip the debate and the discourse to look at both through the triple access system. So I'm sure a lot of you will be very aware of Professor Glenn Lyons and his work around triple access planning. So we're trying to say that, you know, transport problems are not necessarily solved by transport solutions. So there's that role of the spatial plan and also that role of digital connectivity. And then within that, there are different ways about thinking about the sorts of vehicles. So obviously a shift to higher occupancy, better use of our existing assets in terms of road space, but also we need to think about how we use energy within the context of particularly decarbonisation. So lighter, more energy efficient vehicles are going to be a key thing that we need to try and generate a shift to as part of our LTP. So that's kind of a very brief overview of how we started to think and look at the challenges that were there for us as we started to develop the new LTP. Alex is going to give you a quick overview of some of the issues and challenges we've had in developing our approach to that new core strategy.
Cheers. So yeah, that David, as David's kind of set out there, that was that context that we started with, and we sort of shamelessly plugged at the top of the slide here that we set out actually in our green paper, which you can find online, really thinking about why we need to be creative in how we solve our transport problems. But we moved forward from there, and we've currently got a draft core strategy which has been consulted on and is waiting for adoption, and some of the key concepts and initiatives I'll take you through. So just up here in terms of focusing on what's different in our aims and vision. So on the left, our aims, at the top there, I won't go in depth into the range of social and economic and environmental impacts that we're trying to have, other than to say one of the things we did differently in framing the transport problem in terms of its relationship with those was we piggybacked really off our combined authority as a model for inclusive growth based on donut economics. That was all quite complex, and what we wanted to do is really simplify things for the transport world, and that's those three impacts at the bottom. So what we're saying is, if we can improve accessibility, if we can reduce traffic, if we can electrify transport, and we're doing all of those things, then we know we're moving in the right direction in terms of a transport system that better supports those objectives. And on the right is the vision that we set out for that. Now, this was written from the perspective of someone who doesn't have a car, and that was something our citizens really felt. Even though there is a role for car in the future, and that's acknowledged, they acknowledge that there's a need to reduce cars, and they acknowledge that they want everyone in the West Midlands to be able to thrive without a car, because there's lots of people who are in that situation. So we developed a kind of conceptual vision for travel, linking the way that people move and the places that they explore. So it's these walk and wheel, cycle and scoot, ride options, with Ride covering not just our kind of traditional fixed public transport services we're familiar with, but also looking at newer dynamic services like demand responsive transport and things we're familiar with like taxis and PHVs. And those options are all ways of connecting with. So our 15-minute neighbourhoods, that's been a big focus, I'm sure you're all aware of. Traditionally, our local transport plan is focused on the high level. It's kind of in part because of our function as a metropolitan or the regional authority. We've tended to look at that higher level, connecting people across the region. We didn't look down at the local level. So we've connecting people to their 15-minute neighbourhoods, as well as connecting people across the region, 45-minute region, and ensuring that people can access all the things that they need to thrive in that framework. So if we just move on, and in terms of making that happen, so the green paper and its carried through to the core strategy, we've been quite clear about what's needed to make that happen, and this is a very complex diagram, but in really simple terms, a better approach from our view was one where we're increasing our policies and how we're managing demand. It's something that we've said for a long time that we need to do. We've struggled with implementing that, as well as delivering those carrots and delivering better carrots that are better tailored, so better transport options that are tailored to local communities' needs, because of one size fits all solution doesn't work. So we go forward again. And so the whole topic for us presenters has been, what's the challenge with doing that? And I think this is kind of a great slide that sums it up. So the public understand, that members understand this need for the balance of carrots and sticks. They get that there are going to be some managing demand is going to come forward and or it needs to come forward, and that will feel like a constraint on some choices, and that's a painful process to go through. That's acknowledged at an academic level, but doing it is the difficult part. How do you equitably do that? And Chris earlier was alluding to some of those wicked issues to unpick. And on the right, I mean, I threw this together the last couple of days, and it'd be really great to get some thoughts on whether this accurately represents the conundrum we're in. We have been for a number of decades, where right up at the top, we're really clear about wanting great range of travel choices we can articulate to the public. But there's these two tenets that either explicitly or implicitly underpin what we do, which is we don't want to restrict freedom of choice, and also we think that transport users should cover the cost of services, which means we don't have a fully subsidised system where we can just kind of put choices down on the ground wherever we want. So we're trying to grapple with how you move through that, and that's not easy. And solving that problem really is, it's not about the technical detail. It's not about you can do all the technical transport modeling you want. Really, this is about how do we inspire people, how do we have an honest conversation about policy choices, and how do we listen as well to people, how do we work with the public, how do we do co-development so that we can converge on something that strikes the right kind of balance between these these trade-offs. And that's a shared problem across public, members, and us as planners, as advisors, that we need to find a way forward on. And it's a shared problem as well in terms of a national and local level. So it was said earlier about the feeling that there wasn't strong enough national action, and I think from a local level, that's what we've perceived. There isn't that sharing of political burden that's needed to be able to build consensus and have these conversations, and that needs a real change of culture and practices in terms of how we engage with the public and how we progress policy. And in terms of a solution to that, if we just move forward, choices are absolutely key in this, and that's not about travel choices in terms of what individuals can do day to day. It's about the choices that we can make to change that environment so that people can have the options to travel better. And we need to do better in terms of articulate how do we connect with the public, how do we articulate how the policy choices that they can make on their street affect what their lives look like, and what the places in which they live look like. And we've been trying to move forward, and now that's something different that we've been doing. And I've just put up there, if you Google Visions 2030, there's some actual work that you may be interested in that really got to grips with that at a national level. It was a really interesting project. So really trying to help people visualize what that looks like. And then finally, in terms of choices, what that means for an LTP, if we just move forward one. So previously, our LTP has very much been focused kind of on a land of milk and honey. If all of the wind's blowing in the right direction, if we've got all of the funding that we need, if we have if we unlock the impasses that we face in terms of some of those difficult actions, what would we do? And we are planning for that, and we are thinking about what that would look like. But as well, we are looking for a resilient plan that doesn't just look at that. It is also looking at, well, what if, we struggle on some of those fronts? What else could we do? Because carrying on as is not an option that we're considering. So how could we better support those who perhaps have more limited options in a more pragmatic scenario as well? And out of that, perhaps drops no regrets options that are resilient no matter what. So I'll leave it there. I think we've gone considerably over, and hand back to Nick.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Alex. Fabulous presentation. Right, so similar to the morning sessions, if you do have any questions for any of our presenters today, please pop them in the comment box and we will collate them all together and use them as part of our panel discussion once we've heard from all of our presenters. So David, Alex, thanks again, and we'll move swiftly on to our next presentation, which is from Lyndon at Surrey County Council. Lyndon, over to you.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to set out some of the challenges that Surrey had in terms of developing its local transport plan. We come from a backdrop of having not revised our plan for more than a decade, and the context for us is that Surrey has a very large and complex system, very close to London. We declared a climate emergency more than 2 years ago. And, our LTP developed 10 years ago was for a different era, not fit for purpose, very much car focus and not future ready. And just some of those stats that are there on the side, very, very, very high car ownership. I mean, Surrey, it's, 3 cars in one home is not unusual. So we need to change how we think about delivering the future and nice places within our area. So the core of what we wanted to do and kind of our role was to really create something which was a future ready transport system, and that required us to be quite ambitious, rethink what we wanted to do, and our mandate from our members was to be transformative. I think when you look at the kind of building blocks of our local transport plan, of course we had organisational priorities and objectives, but if I was to pull out key things within those, this LTP, more than any, and I've worked on 3 or 4, this is the 4th LTP that I've worked on, health is actually being one of the main areas that we've put a lot of emphasis behind and seen that as to be quite important. I think it may have been there in the past, but it's front and centre in what we want to deliver locally. We want nice places to live in. We want those places to be healthy. We also want our transport system to contribute to that kind of healthy lifestyle that people can have. So I think that was a big part. And I think when you look at how government sees this, actually this does join up. It also makes transport something which government can fund alongside the health service, because it actually contributes to it. We wanted to be able to make that really quite clear. The other part, of course, is the Greener Futures agenda and net zero. So that is core, alongside our sustainable economies and growth that we want to have, and having a well-connected community. And Surrey has that by virtue of the demographics. So how we wanted to do it, I mean, I think placemaking forms a big part of what we want to do. And part of that is some of the things about reducing unnecessary journeys, shifting away from car use, and improving our capacity, infrastructure capacity. So I think there is something about using the transport system, but also having nice places, and making full use of digital connectivity in how we deliver that result. So the how, in terms of that translated into what we wanted to achieve. Of course, in the pandemic, digital connectivity came of its own, and that's sort of one side of the continuum of supporting behaviour change. But we're also looking at some of the things that have been there for some time, so active travel, the public transport benefits, but then also on the other side, making our network future ready for electric vehicle rollout. So I think there's a sort of continuum of activity that we want to deliver in this next LTP period. Core to what we want to do is to embed this hierarchy. I think many of us have struggled to deliver what is essentially on this hierarchy. That's basically because of pushback from the public, pushback from members, but essentially to deliver net zero, we need to kind of look at this hierarchy and apply it in a way which can achieve the agenda we absolutely need to deliver. So this is a decision-making framework that we're looking at, and that's going through and is front and centre on our LTP, going through full council in July. And we'll use this to effectively design the kind of infrastructure that we want to see in the future and the priorities. And it's not one size fits all. Of course, that inverted pyramid and the kind of items within it would be delivered in different ways in different places. So, you know, rural Surrey, it would be different to an urban area in Surrey. So we would be looking to deliver different things in different places, but make no mistake, we are looking for that idea of the 20-minute neighbourhood. We are looking for embedding the sort of healthy streets design guide, and we are looking for that improved health and well-being and reducing our carbon footprint. So our plan 22 to 32 includes a number of things, some things which have always been there, but there's a big focus now on making ourselves future ready with the rollout of electric vehicles, but also things like the 20-minute neighbourhood, and that we're looking to deliver through livable neighbourhoods. So that's a combination of both the low traffic neighbourhoods and public realm, and we see these two things being important. The public realm being really important to generate why people should have, you know, a different arrangement in their residential streets, and there needs to be, you know, benefits, and we see that coming from the sort of public realm improvements, pocket parks, nice places to use, reclaiming streets. This is all important, and I think, you know, you know, the livable neighbourhoods part is actually a way of being affordable in what we want to deliver. I think, you know, these kinds of ideas are actually not that expensive to implement, but they require significant engagement, and that's the place that we'll be spending a lot of time on, to get that engagement with members, with the public, with stakeholders, to deliver that result, because we think there are quite cost-effective solutions there early on to deliver the sort of net zero ambition. So in terms of our indicative delivery plan, you know, there are various things on this slide, and it includes some of the things I've talked about, but it includes the shift using walking and cycling. It includes the livable neighbourhoods. It also includes our digital connectivity. All of those things are important alongside the electric vehicle rollout. So in terms of kind of what we've been doing in terms of engagement, because I've seen that part is actually quite key. The engagement on our plan has been really the part that we've had to do quite a lot of work on, particularly getting to hard to reach groups. We found that we've had to do additional work with younger people, but also some other hard to reach groups. And so we ran extra opportunities to directly engage those kind of groupings in particular, to ensure that what we were producing was something that they did broadly support. And they've, you know, from the main consultation and some of these additional elements that we put in, we've actually got to a place where they are all on side for what we're proposing. And we're looking to go to, as I said, full council in July, having the document and our plan being approved at Cabinet in May. So, you know, what kind of comments did we receive? I think we had an awful lot of positive comments, and I think these are shown on this slide, but particularly active travel being seen as quite positive in terms of personal health benefits. And we have gone for making public health and the benefits of transport in the right way being a key part of what we want to deliver and how we want to sell this. Of course, there are less favourable comments. You know, you have to accept that in the scale of what we want to deliver. But I think you know, we didn't think that we weren't going to move forward with this. And I think, you know, the endorsement already by Cabinet shows that we're in that place, and we expect to capitalise on that when we go to full council. Again, you know, our member induction, again, members, you know, have been supportive. They've got obviously their challenges locally, but this is how we sell it, and we think that we, you know, can absolutely do that. So I'm going to leave it there and open that up for the next session.
Thanks, Lyndon. Great stuff, and I'm glad to see the take out the anti-car stuff comments are still coming through these consultations. Great stuff. Right, so already seeing some themes in our discussions. Carbon's coming up a lot. Engagement, the importance of engagement, digital investment, and demand management. So really great 2 sessions so far. Right, so we're looking good for time. So now we'll move on to our 3rd presentation today, which is Frank from Hampshire County Council. Frank, it's all yours.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to set a little bit of scene. Hampshire County Council is a large county. It's 75% rural in terms of geographical area, but 75% of the population live in the 25% of the rest of the area, which is urban. It's a 2-tier system, so we have local planning authorities and then the highway authority is the county. It's relatively affluent, but it does have pockets of deprivation, and those pockets are generally masked in the averages, so you don't get to see them unless you look into the detail. And it's one of the most car-dependent counties and local authorities in the country. We started to develop a local transport plan just as COVID started to take an impact and a hold. We did that for 2 reasons. One was because we declared carbon neutrality targets, and it was quite clear that transport was going to be a big player in helping to resolve those issues. And the other was that at that time, the director thought that we'd all be sitting around at home with nothing to do. So he said, "Can you do a local transport plan, Frank?" So we took it on, and then we're busier than we've ever been before. So I think some of the learning points that I want to cover today, and I'm only going to cover 2. There were many learning points, but the 2 that kind of stuck out for me, one was around decarbonisation, and one was around the cultural issues that will apply both nationally and at a local level as practitioners try to develop local transport plans and bring them forward. So I'm going to start with the decarbonisation work that we did. We did some trajectory analysis, so we wanted to understand how far off would we be from achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 if we just carried on as we were. And we mapped that, and we used WS Atkins to help us in terms of do that analysis using strategic transport models and fairly robust methodology based on Bayes emissions figures and so forth. The results of that work concluded various conclusions, but I think because the data is very similar in Hampshire to the way it works nationally, and also probably in most of the other areas around the country, I don't think the conclusions that were reached will be very different anywhere else. They'll just be playing different tunes, if you like, but generally speaking, it's going to be the same sort of stuff. So the first kind of key conclusion was that the national action with the banning of sales of diesel vehicles was going to have quite a major impact in terms of reducing carbon. And it kind of does 75% of the job in terms of provided it actually happens, that is. The next part of it, the next conclusion we reached was that the timing was quite critical, because the banning of combustion engines doesn't happen until quite late on in the process, really. And actually what that analysis means is that we, and it's been talked about in other sessions as well by other presenters, is that the local action that's needed is needed almost immediately to get on top of the challenge, so that we don't head off on the trajectory that then we can't catch up on. And in Hampshire alone, I think we use up all our carbon budget by 2050 by 2036, unless we take quite severe action rapidly now. We also found that the analysis revealed we needed to make not only those changes, go completely electric and do national action, but we also needed to find some way of reducing traffic levels by around 10% in order to achieve that carbon neutrality by 2050. And that would be that private vehicle use would either have to be through mode shift or not travelling or other means mechanisms. An interesting fact that was revealed by, I think it was Gillian Annabelle, was that one of the things, and she's a professor at Leeds University, she found that 3% of the longest journeys account for 30% of all the carbon emissions. And that came out through the research that we did. And I think it's something that means that, you know, we spend a lot of time focusing on local journeys and converting them to walking and cycling, but actually it's the longest 3% or the longest journeys that we really need to target that's likely to have the greatest impact if we can do it. The other things that came out were that we could focus on decarbonisation, but actually there's still a residual air quality problem. Electric vehicles are something like 20% heavier than diesel vehicles, so they're already going to be producing more pollutants, not at the end of the tailpipe, but certainly from tyre dust and also from brake dust and those sorts of activities. And they still will be prevalent even in a future where there are more vehicles running around because perhaps it's cheaper to drive in the future. One thing to note is that we found no particular solution to the problem of HGVs and decarbonising those. One was because there isn't currently a plan to do so. And at the end of our analysis by 2050, one of the major contributors to carbon emissions is actually HGVs, which haven't been able to be converted because there isn't, or we haven't found a solution that can do so at this time. So those are the sorts of lessons we learnt from the decarbonisation work that we did. The other lessons that we learnt were more cultural. So we looked at the national policy that was changing around us, Bus Back Better, gear change, transport decarbonisation plan, and there's a clear shift here in favour of active modes and public transport. It's a shift that we identified early on in Hampshire as needing not only a change in policy, but also a quite a distinct change in culture away from car dependency. And that meant away from planning for vehicles and towards planning for people and place instead, but also away from predict and provide towards decide and provide, because we still do predict and provide in much of what we do when it comes to the frontline activities that we get involved in. So we did a bit of an analysis of culture and the culture issues that existed. Some of them are not in our control and some are. So there were a national culture issues we looked at. These obviously we can't change, but there were things like actually the real terms cost of motoring is getting cheaper compared to public transport, and in fact the gap is widening. So there is a culture nationally that allows that to persist. There is a culture that doesn't want to talk about plans for vehicle taxation or road user charging at this time, which is a very difficult thing to rationalise when a lot of your modelling is having to be based on forecasts of traffic growth going forwards, with current forecast being that the cost of motoring goes down even further because of electrification. Finally, we were looking at the local transport authority and the local planning authority context and the culture of both transport authorities and local planning authorities in Hampshire. We identified a number of key cultural issues that we were going to face. First of all, members and senior officers. There's still a culture, no matter what people say, of looking at and holding contradictions in your head at the same time. So a lot of stuff there around. It's quite easy to at this moment in time in particular look at the cost of living and consider, is decarbonisation the top priority now, or is it actually dealing with the cost of living? And actually, for many directors, members, they see the old-fashioned road schemes as a way of supporting the economy, and that's a cultural issue that we're going to have to grapple with. The other one that we kind of identified, one of the key ones, was in development planning. NPPF still has statements in it which kind of lead us towards a predict and provide model of development planning in terms of doing transport assessments, where we look at the severe traffic impact of development, but don't necessarily in the round look at all the other issues around sustainable modes in perhaps as great a deal as we need to. Partly that's to do with the planning process, and partly it's to do with the need to look at the guidance at national and local level to make them better and more fit for purpose. There's another point at section 278 and also design stage when we're looking at schemes. If we've got engineers who are quite like the rule books and they love DMRB and they'll follow the DMRB designs to the nth degree. I know of one authority that having signed a PFI, which bound all their roads to be designed to DMRB, but it has no motorway networks at all, is now struggling with the cultural issues associated with having to try and pass plans through that still meet DMRB when actually they're doing residential streets and that sort of activity and trying to design those spaces. So we've got situations where that needs to be resolved. So how do you do that? I can only give you kind of some of the examples that we've done at Hampshire, which is to evaluate your own culture, look at the barriers that you think you're going to face going forward, have that conversation up front early on, to see what culture you would like to have. In Hampshire, we recognised we needed to change. We developed what we called a Centre for Active Travel Excellence, which is a group of multidisciplinary group of professionals across the organisation, which is looking at this challenge in some detail and looking at how we change our policies, practices, and also the informal things that we do in the way that we work. We, like Lyndon, are looking to develop a whole suite of tools that will allow us to have the debates about what places and spaces should look like just once, and then use those tools to allow us to get that right first time. So we're developing a similar movement and place framework, road user utility hierarchy, and we're also using the Healthy Places toolkit to actually quantify and assess whether or not we've got our infrastructure in the right state or whether it needs to improve in one direction or the other. We're also, on the back of the local transport plan, which we currently have out to consultation, which is just about to close, we're also, on the back of it, needing to develop guidance to sit alongside it as daughter documents. So one of the key ones of that is that we think that we will need to develop something that kind of gives a local interpretation of MPPF at a local level, so it's development planning and master planning guidance, but also then goes into the next level of that and starts to offer training to our practitioners, but also practitioners in district councils as well. So those are the two learning points, one on the need to really look hard at the culture, and the other around what you're likely to find when you look at the decarbonisation and carbon trajectory work. And I'll stop there if that's okay.
Thanks, Frank. Great to hear the work you're doing, and all the best with your project to try and encourage engineers to change their culture. I've been trying for many years, working with my engineering colleagues, so all the best with that one. Right, we're getting some really great comments, so please do keep them coming in. We've got one more presentation now, and then we will move to our panel discussion. So finally, I'd like to introduce Sue from Leicester City Council. Sue, hi Sue, it's all yours.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me. I should say that although I'm working for Leicester City Council at the moment, I'm speaking on my own behalf today. So that's based on quite a long history of being involved in local transport plans in various places in the UK. So what I've done, I've had the advantage of only being asked to do this quite late. So I've done my presentation quite late as well. And that has meant that I've been able to do it this morning and pick up a few things that have appeared in the other presentations. So I apologize in advance for my very basic presentation here, very minimalist. But all I've done is pick out a few aspects of LTPs that I think either haven't been gone into or should be gone into a bit more. So the first one is really about the format and the structure. That LTPs should be vision-led, and I didn't want to lose this point. Strictly speaking, LTPs, I think, should be short and strategic and easily read and understood, such that your stakeholder partners can do the equivalent of picking it up and waving it around. They won't do it because it's digital, but should be able to say, we are part of this. This is us. We are part of this. And that doesn't mean writing a really thick book like LTPs used to be written and then doing a summary. I don't mean that. I mean that the story should be able to be told in a relatively small number of pages and photographs and diagrams and things. And the problem that I think that we are potentially heading to is that DfT by trying to regulate LTPs might lead to a lowest common denominator, with everybody trying to do everything that is needed to meet the DfT requirements. And by doing that, they lose the vision. They'll lose how the thing originally started off with. So whilst by all means, as many technical background papers as possible to make sure that the LTP is really the vision and is backed up as a vision and is coherent and is linked in with the other policies, but it's not long. It's something that people can actually use. And then my last point there is, I think that we should recognise that LTPs the production of LTPs, it doesn't really start and stop. It's sort of ongoing. And there are many LTPs that are already, we've heard about some of them, that are already started and already in process, and that it would be, I think, inefficient to not recognise that and to understand that all LTPs just process on and move on. And I just rather nastily there pointed out that 2024 is actually a really tight deadline for doing an LTP if you start now. Even if it is short, it doesn't mean to say that it can be done quickly. And to get a consultation, to get an LTP written and a consultation exercise or an engagement exercise in a year is going some. So next slide, please. So my next point is about carbon, and so far we've had a lot of presentations that are basically about how difficult it is. To me, it's quite a relief, because throughout my career, I've been trying to persuade people to do things they don't really want to do, whereas now carbon reduction is a popular thing to do. It's what people want, and in fact, people get quite frustrated that LTPs aren't going far enough, in my experience. And I was also trying to tackle the point that's been made several times, that if you're looking at carbon reduction, then you're looking at long journeys, because they're the ones that create the most carbon. But to cities and towns and settlements generally, carbon reduction is just part of an integrated plan to improve the place, to improve health, to improve connectivity, to improve all sorts of things within the settlement. So in some ways, just using carbon reduction as a objective is very limiting when you're talking about settlements. You could argue, I think, that reduction of carbon is more relevant when you're talking about bigger scale things, and something else, which I'm not sure what it is, but something about how successful the place is more relevant when you're talking about settlements. So my next point, please. Next slide, please. This is just to support Peter Jones's comments this morning. Engaging the traffic generators is really, really important, and it is done But as I think Peter said, it's done in the sense that traffic generators are engaged from the point of view of travel plans or from the point of view of behaviour change. It's transport orientated, when more needs to be done to look at their core operations, to see how how unnecessary traffic can be reduced. And the difficulty in doing that is that it is people intensive, it is resource intensive, as Nicola said. And I think people probably need to be trained as well, because there's probably a bit of management training or operations training in there as well, so that people who are advising traffic generators about their traffic would need to know a bit about how the business works as well. So I think there's more work to be done on working out exactly what that does involve, and if people have got the capabilities to do it. And the last one, please. Yeah, this is my personal one. Charging. It seems to me that charging has not really been talked about today very much, and it's a bit like Brexit or the elephant in the room. Because of the necessity to move really quickly on climate and on some of the other things that we've already identified, you've got to do everything, and charging has just got to be a part of it. So charging people who do the wrong thing, if you like, and using that money to incentivize people to do the right thing, it's just got to be one part of the mix. And in doing that, I think it's important that people can see what's happening, because as I've said before, carbon reduction is really popular. So if people can see that there is an increase in a charge here, but that equates to a reduction in the charge there, then it's much more likely that it can happen. And I think that that it is possible for national and local charging initiatives can work together. And I'm not just talking about road charging or workplace parking levy, but also parking charges and work to reduce bus fares or to create discounts for bus fares or whatever it is. Those things need to work together, but they can if we can plan them properly. And this is obviously where the LTP comes in being able to do that. But in order to do that, you've got to recognise that charging is an issue and is one of the elements of the local transport plan mix. So that's it. That's my roundup of slightly provocative things that have come out of the discussion so far.
Thanks, Sue. Fabulous, and again, good to hear carbon coming through there. I'm happy to tell you that I'm actually writing our carbon reduction plan for Martin Holdings, and we are a huge traffic generator, 1,200 vehicles in our fleet, and it's a big part of our Scope 3 emissions plan. So you're absolutely right, we do need to engage with big businesses who are the traffic generators. Right, that's it for our formal presentations. Thank you, everyone. If I could invite you all back into the virtual room, we will proceed with our panel discussions. I've got some great questions coming in from everyone who's dialed in. I think that's everyone there. Sue, Lyndon, Frank, Alex, David. Fabulous, you're all there. So I'll kick off with a question from the DFT actually, and it's to all those of you writing LTPs. What and pretty much what support do you need to develop these? Sue mentioned 2022, 2024. Is a challenge. So what support do you need in terms of developing the right level of ambition for your LTPs? And I'll go to David and Alex first.
I'm going to be sort of probably a bit controversial. I can see the LTP guidance that DFT are kind of developing. It's welcome. Obviously, we've not had anything since 2009. My biggest concern about it is it's going to be a little bit vague and wishy-washy and still talk a bit sort of motherhood and apple pie about this is what you should be doing. And I think it's still going to leave us still open to trying to find our way through some of these really difficult policy agendas. Now, absolutely get that at the top level at Westminster, Whitehall, there's not an appetite to to also then say you need to do demand management, you need to, you know, go health or leather on that behavior change agenda. But the signs are there, they're talking about it, it's kind of permeating through, you know, it's noted in things like the decarbonisation plan that, you know, there is a significant level of behaviour change needed. My biggest concern is still, we'll say the right things, but it will get lost in translation, and we won't have the ultimately kind of like the push to get our politicians who make decisions at that local level then to do those difficult things. And I think that is probably one of the key things that we do need. I think it needs more teeth nationally to force us into some of these things. I equate this kind of some of the air quality agenda. So Birmingham and the other cities that did it probably wouldn't have had clean air zones if there wasn't a mandate to do it.
Yeah.
And it took us down a route to actually have to do some quite, you know, difficult interventions that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I think there is a lesson to be learned from that, because if we're serious about decarbonisation and tackling some of these other things, we're not going to get there.
Interesting. More government directives. Frank, any views on further DfT support for this process?
Well, of course, it's always very helpful when you get capacity funding to support the revenue costs of developing the LTP. So thank you very much for that. So that was much needed and very much very useful. I think I saw the plea from me in terms of flexibility, in terms of the guidance, and I know it is guidance generally, as in terms of the italics. Just need to make sure that we've still got enough local autonomy, that we haven't got too fixed and rigid in the way that we go forward in LTPs, because everywhere is slightly different. Hampshire is a big area with multiple travel to work areas. We're probably more interested in getting our policy framework right rather than our programme of works, for example. So we didn't talk much about policy really so far today, but actually getting your policy framework right is a really good, you know, starting point for many other things. I think if the DfT can identify generic tools, that's going to help us all. So carbon impact assessment tools that are generic, that can be used, and we allow ourselves to compare like with like across authorities would be really useful. Similarly, things around development planning and master planning guidance, which we're going to commission anyway, but if there was a national best practice document on that, you know, interpreting MPPF, defining what mixed use density looks, you know, and accessibility, what standards are good looks like, that would be useful. And finally, I think echoing what others have said, I think a clear and helpful statement on the future of vehicle taxation and road user charging would really underpin a lot of the analysis that we're doing and help us move forward in a positive way.
Absolutely. Yeah, brings us back to Sue's last point, doesn't it, on charging. Linked to that, and you said what looks good. I have another question around best practice forums, and other than events like this, are there any other best practice forums that exist, that those going through similar challenges? And all your presentations today, you brought up similar challenges that you're facing. Is there any forums to explore these? Sue, you mentioned you've been involved in LTPs for a long time. Is this something that exists across the public sector?
Well, Leicester runs a local transport plan workplace parking levy roundtable, but that's for authorities that are interested in both of those items. And I'm sure there are other sort of roundtable type activities that go on, but it's possible that there could be something that's a bit more well thought out and a bit more structured than there currently is. I don't know. What do other people think?
I was just about to say, Lyndon, any views on it? Is that something the DfT should coordinate, some best practice like forums? Yeah,
I think where DfT in the past have coordinated that kind of forum, those kinds of forums, they've been helpful. But I think, you know, I think some of the work done by the subnational bodies, the things like Transport for the South East, they bring us together, and we do share information through those that the authorities do. Through that mechanism. I think one of the things that we're probably not good at, and maybe DfT can help us, is that we tend to do a lot of the work, of course, individually in our own places, when it's actually when you break it all down, it's very much the same. I know there will be slight differences in different places, but there aren't that many permutations. And I think there's probably quite, an opportunity for DFT to help us maybe have more joined up working between us, which we can pull off the shelf. I know Frank and I are talking about how we might do some of the daughter documents for our LTPs as joint work rather than do it separately. But I think if that approach was adopted more widely across the country, I think that would bring efficiencies and also share our knowledge.
Yeah, I remember I was doing local implementation plans in London many years ago, and 32 of these documents, which are all ever so similar. Is there a way to streamline the process and make it easy for those who are delivering them? Which takes on to another question we've got around resources and time and funding. And one of the questions is how have you still got time to do this with everything that your authorities are going through with firefighting, with post-COVID recovery? Is it something that you're finding a challenge? Alex, do you want to answer that one?
I can do. I mean, the honest answer from us probably is that we are fortunate in that. So in the West Midlands, the West Midlands Combined Authority, who me and David work for, we have more capacity to think at that strategic level than the local authorities, who are probably dealing with more of the coalface immediate issues. I mean, our organisation is facing some of those issues operationally in terms of we do a lot of the interface between us and the bus operators, and people will be aware that public transport operations are facing some serious problems with inflation and low demand at the moment. But in terms of time and resource, that is something that we, as an organisation, it's not a resource problem. I think our challenge in terms of time is actually sort of almost the time's running out, and it's how do you get there quick enough? Because I think I mean, we declared a climate emergency in 2018, and that was supposed to be a wake-up call to say things are heading in the wrong direction. We need to do things differently. We have done some good stuff since then, but it still very much feels that these things, like change takes a long time, and that's because of the way we used to work in. But we still not got the message in terms of we can't keep on doing things that way. It needs to be quicker.
Sure, yeah. You mentioned coal face. Obviously, my lithium face quote didn't have any picture yet. I'll try and get that out on a hashtag later. See if it can gain some traction. Frank, how about resources at your authority? Is that a challenge?
It's always a challenge. We like Alex had a burning platform. We've developed our carbon neutrality target. We were taking our action plan for carbon neutrality through decision-making processes, and with 51% of emissions caused by transport in Hampshire, it was a no-brainer that it was going to be the area of focus, and that we were going to put resources into it.
And Linda, we may as well finish off on the resourcing issue. And any advice from your side?
I mean, I think the engagement side on resourcing, in terms of resourcing, that is something that many authorities, including Surrey, didn't really do very well. We've had to do quite a lot of work to get that right, and we've still got to do a lot more. And I think it's about bringing the wider kind of parts of a local authority together. I mean, Surrey has now developed quite a good insights team centrally. That's actually been quite helpful and core to enabling us to engage properly and do a different form of, well, not just the consultation, but the pre-engagement. So I think there is something about being able to resource that and and work beyond our boundaries in transport to make that happen. So it's more effective. And I think many of the measures we're talking about, and certainly we're looking at, are going to be quite contentious. and actually that conversation where you can find a wider grouping of people that can agree with you rather than, you know, people objecting in their backyard. That's really crucial to delivering some of the things that we've got to do.
You're right, and I think these contentious plans, you know, charging, you name it, they will generate more positive and negative feelings, and to resource that engagement is going to be something that councils need to consider as part of their plans. Right, so we've got a question on freight, and I know a couple of you touched on freight in your presentations. The question is, what role does sort of freight and freight planning and policy have within the LTPs, and how important is it? David, how about we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Freight's very, very important. I mean, it's important to the West Midlands economy. We're in sort of the golden triangle of freight and logistics sector, really. So it's important. In our LTP at the moment, we haven't sort of focused on it in specific detail, and that's kind of the next stage in the development of our LTP. I think what we're kind of learning is that we need to be quite clever with freight. I think it was reflecting the future freight plan that came out last week or the week before, and there is this kind of freight blindness. We don't really understand it. We kind of know what sort of public sector outcomes we want to achieve. Obviously, we want to kind of make freight more efficient, have less movements, less, smaller vehicles if possible, or at least fewer vehicles. We want to decarbonize their fleets. But what we often find is the kind of interventions we bring forward are kind of quite blunt policy measures, which often upset the freight and logistics sector because they're not kind of well developed or co-designed. So I think that's got to be something we kind of get a handle on. As we're developing our new West Midlands LDP, we're not currently sitting there and having a specific section on freight. I think we're quite clear that freight kind of permeates the different elements of our LTP. So we're developing it, as Alex said, so we've got these 6 big moves, which cover sort of all things from, the public transport network to the highway network, and also sort of behaviour change. I think freight sits within all of those things. It's not a specific area of the LTP on its own. It's really intrinsic and sits across all of them. So we're having to think about it that way. But I think one of the key things that we need to do is understand freight better, and we're doing a piece of work with Aston University at the moment to really sort of get into the heart of understanding the freight movements across the region, to really start to inform some of that policy and strategy development and collaborate better with the freight and logistics sector.
No, that's interesting, and I ask rather selfishly because again my travel plans for where I work, the freight vehicles are the ones that are causing me most headaches with availability of electric vehicles, etc. Sue, how have you dealt with freight in the work that you've done, and in particular, and I don't know, maybe freight specific charging schemes that we're seeing coming through?
I think freight specific charging schemes might be a bit difficult, and in fact the workplace parking levy at Nottingham doesn't cover freight. It's commuter cars basically, not freight. I think in many cities freight seems to be a problem of major roads rather than a problem of the localities, and that has only changed recently, I think, with the pandemic and the sort of greater understanding then about last mile delivery and about having a DPD and Hermes vans at the end of your road every 5 minutes, and I think then that has brought that sort of freight into the local transport planning sort of ambit more than it was before. So I agree with what David was saying. It's easy to do it wrong. It's easy to do it without proper engagement and consultation with the freight operators. And I'm not sure that anybody's got good examples, but I'm prepared to be proven wrong.
Thanks, Sue. And we've got 10 minutes left in this session. We've got some questions still that we haven't yet answered. I need to jump off now. So I'm going to hand over this last 10 minutes panel discussion to one of my colleagues, to Peter. If Peter could, there's Peter. Hi, Peter. Thanks for taking this very last 10 minutes. Just thank you from me to all the presentations today, and thank you all for your questions as well.
Thank you very much, Nick. Very good stuff. Can I just pick up a couple more issues in the last 10 minutes here? There's two bits that I was interested in, both in what most of you have mentioned and also in some chat. The point about consultation and the mechanisms as well as the target audience. We're moving into a more digital, smart way of doing things. I know there's some software and some systems out there to engage. And then coupled to that, once the plan's been produced, how do you make it digitally available in a form that people can find interesting things for themselves in, rather than being a specialist document just for the use of transport planning people? I mean, I know you, Lyndon, both you and I think you've done some work on this, haven't you, in Surrey, about, both input and output in the new world of digital information.
Yeah, I mean that was quite core to what we would produce as a new set of documents. So you're right. I mean, I think there are two versions really of our document. There's the version thought I'd call the technical people who really need to understand the how we got to what is actually presented, and is also forward faces any funding opportunities when we're working with government and other bodies where that needs to be really robust. And then there's the public side, which is on our, which will be on our website, which are actually more a kind of the ability to dip into kind of quite succinct areas without having to wade through all the rest of it. So I think there's it's how we're looking to present it, and that that will need to be tested when it actually goes live.
Do you have resource internally for that sort of new way of communicating?
We've certainly got a much better digital team, which is better set up than we had in the past, and I think that has helped us. And I said an insights team,
yeah,
corporately that's driving things corporately. So it's not being done just by, the environment and transport kind of part of the organisation. It's been, we're working with central groups who are now better resourced to deliver that, not just for us but for the council as a whole.
Yeah, and I assume the same, David and Alex. Where are you at on all that stuff?
I think we're on a journey. I think it's definitely something we really need to improve at. I think we found when we were doing the green paper and the core strategy that skill set within our own organisation was somewhat lacking. And whilst we've sort of made some inroads, I think there's still a need for us to really think about the best ways of creating the content and delivering it. And in terms of platforms and engagement, I mean, just picking up on that quickly, we've got what we call the MROC, our Marketing Research Online Community, and that's been really helpful to sort of do deep dives into some of the issues and really sort of get beyond the traditional kind of engagement that we would generally do with, putting a copy of the LTP online and putting copies in libraries with a questionnaire. And that's really sort of been a key part of the work, and we need to keep building on that. I think we have struggled to make some of our stuff accessible, and particularly even with using sort of a range of social media platforms, we're struggling still to get engagement with particular groups, be that the young or sort of more sort of ethnic minority groups as well. And that's something that we need to keep, improving our approach on. But I think in terms of the skill sets within our own organisation, we've still got some work to do in that space.
So you flagged up this keep it simple, short. what resource do you use to get that right? Is that you, or do you go to third parties who are good at this, or how would you get that right now?
How would I get that right?
Well, what are the inputs you need to get it right?
Well, it's what we've tried to do at Leicester, and there, I think the key was really getting the right people involved at the right time. And this is a resource; is definitely a resource issue in all authorities, I think. So getting the right people involved at the right time, that includes the councillors as well, and in Leicester's case, the city mayor, and so that when you come to write it, you've got the basics there in terms of the wider policies and the political priorities, rather than starting with the technical work and moving on to the policy later. So we tried to start with the vision, and from the vision we drew out objectives and policies, and then the actual projects on the ground. And I mean, that's not I'm not saying that's like rocket science. I mean, it's not. But to do that in a reasonably short and understandable way, we did get comms people involved in actually writing the main document as well. But to do it in a short and understandable way is not easy at all. And I think that's one key skill that transport planners should have.
But if I can declare an interest here, my work area, which is information communication, as you hopefully know, is overlapping into this territory, and I find it fascinating how our skills in producing documents and posting them in the new forms are now very similar to the ones you need. I've got it in mind perhaps to have another session, specialist conversation on this subject, because I think there's a lot of interesting skill sets to bring together about what you do with quality information that's been produced internally for one purpose that can be presented in more than one way these days. So I might be speaking again to all of you and others about that for later in the year. I think we've got 3 or 4 minutes left. I'm looking at the questions. There's one about making sure that the plans are gender sensitive. You know, there's quite a lot of discussion about the fact that middle-aged men's needs are more likely to get addressed than those of women and other types of households. Has anybody done anything special on that?
I'm happy to pick that up with full disclosure of having no lived experience. I think so. One of the things we've tried really hard with our LTP is to move away from some of our biased focuses. So we've tended to be really focused on commuting. We've tended to be really focused on travel to and from city centres. We work in terms of timetables and journey times. And actually our approach, so in our LTP we talk about wanting to improve accessibility, and we really need a better perspective on what that means. So there are many human aspects of people's journeys that we're not taking into consideration well enough. Do I feel safe? If I'm got an assisted cycle, is the infrastructure, does that allow me to travel safely? The people don't have rigid time schedules throughout their day. They need flexibility. If they've got families, they might need to drop their plans and change plans midway through the day. How does the transport system actually enable them to do that? So one of the things, gender is a big part of that, in terms of the way we have been approaching the problem has not recognized the wider needs of everyone else and all of the other reasons for travel that go on. And absolutely within our transport plan, we're trying to think about those other aspects of accessibility that matter, not just the things that are easy to compute in models like journey times.
Anyone else like to come on to that one?
I'd just like to refer everybody back to Chris Bureau's presentation, which went through some of the more interesting aspects of gender equality, as well as other sorts of equality as well.
I was pleased to discover, completely by accident, Lyndon, that Chris has been working with you guys, and the complementary nature of what you said and what she said was not programmed, but it's a good example of a different way of looking at things. Frank, you put your hand up on that one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Peter, that we started the process, again, looking very early at doing an equalities impact assessment, which has actually helped shape the LTP from start and through to the end. As part of that, we engaged with what we call our Equal Balance Network at work, which is a group of people that get together and talk about a range of equalities issues. So, yeah, that's been kind of embodied at the very heart of the LTP and throughout the process. And in fact, there's a section in our draft which is actually a 10-point plan which looks to address equalities issues, the ones that we felt were the most significant to focus on in the first instance.
So, well done, all of you. Excellent inputs. I will thank Nick in his absence for a lively sharing role as well. Can I thank you five very much for what you've said? I think it's brought us down to earth in terms of what it's like to be out there in the fields, the coalface, or wherever we should say these days. I'm not sure I'm going to buy lithium mining as the best analogy to describe people who roll their sleeves up and get on with the job, but we need a new one if it's not coal mining. So thank you very much indeed. What is going to happen now is that there'll be another short break before we return. But before that, can I just pick up on the point I made earlier, that we're in a field of endeavour, publishing, information exchange, networking as a business, and I would like to put a plug in here for Local Transport Today and its 30-plus year role in informing and supporting transport professionals in matters that affect UK transport, and no more so than local transport plans, which are now back on the top level agenda. Last year, we transitioned from being a print product supplied through the post to a digital medium produced in a variety of forms, including downloadable version of the magazine, much in the form it used to be, but you can read online on devices or print out at your own convenience now. And we use the same material in other forms on our lttmagazine.co.uk website. Our products will continue to evolve with the new digital capabilities available. And another bonus from this new entity is ability to make things available to people away from the normal office copy and physically supplied single copies of the publication that we used to promote. And the savings that we've made from not needing to cut down trees and employ the postal services are being passed on by a reduced, significantly reduced subscription rates. So I know a lot of people probably remember the LTT when it was in print, but perhaps haven't discovered it's all its varieties digitally. And I would encourage you to check out the lttmagazine.co.uk website to see how we might provide information and other ways of communicating between professionals in the modern time. Thank you for listening to the commercial. I will now sign off for 15 minutes and we'll be back at 3:20 for a bumper last session of today's very, very intensive and productive event. See you soon.